Good morning to you both.
Morning. Morning.
I guess we're looking at two deadlines this morning, aren't we? Two to talk about. There's the US Justice Department. They've got 30 days now that Trump signed that final document, to release everything they've got on Epstein. All the documents, all the emails, all the photos. And back here, once a prince, now just Andrew, has until this evening to respond to that US House Committee request for him to give evidence to them, to be recorded. We don't expect he's going to be uttering a peep, do we?
No. So Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor's approach throughout this whole episode, following on from the disastrous interview that he gave to Newsnight, has been to keep his head down. And I think it's vanishingly unlikely that he will cross the Atlantic in order to be cross-examined by US congressmen in order to reveal everything that he knew. I think that his whole approach will be to find somewhere in Norfolk, to stay there and to hope, vain hope that it is, that this will all blow over.
Just remind us, Jonathan, is there any power to force him to do that? Has he got the option of going to ground?
I don't think the United States has any power. Very interesting question if a Westminster, a parliamentary committee tries to summon him, because he's no longer a prince. You're not really supposed to turn down an invitation to a select committee if Parliament summons you. So that's an interesting question, and who knows, maybe one of the parliamentary committees will attempt to ask him to come to the House of Commons and account to him for himself.
There is the possibility, we were discussing this on the programme yesterday, and it's down the road, but it's there, that he could be extradited by America. We carried a statement from one of Epstein's victims yesterday, who said she was very confident that Andrew had had relations with other girls, other than Giuffre, who had been sex trafficked to him. That was her allegation. We've had no direct response from Andrew on that. If those allegations were to get some traction in America, it could be that the justice authorities would seek to interview Andrew, would seek to put him in court. So he might be extradited from this country.
Extradition is a possibility.
Yeah.
We do have an extradition treaty with the US. And the other thing is that I'm sure Andrew's lawyers would say that this was outrageous, that there's no evidence against him. What makes it difficult for him is that his initial story has subsequently eroded, because he's made claims about never having met Virginia Giuffre. The evidence so far suggests that actually, at the very least, that's a misremembering. And it does appear that the nature of his contact with Epstein went way beyond that which he admitted to in the Newsnight interview. So if he says, look, I'm an honest man who's just been framed, then his case is very weak.
Well, as we said, and we've said repeatedly on this programme, he said in the Newsnight interview that he had absolutely no memory of Virginia Giuffre, and yet leaked emails, only leaked 2 or 3 weeks ago, show that he was conspiring with Epstein to smear her name. They were swapping information about her social security number in America, her date of birth, allegations that she might have committed a criminal offence in America. All of this was pinging back and forth in emails between Epstein and Andrew after he told Newsnight and the world that he'd broken off all contact with Epstein. So, as a witness, he's pretty flawed.
Completely. Now, of course, Virginia Giuffre herself, and, you know, obviously we must respect her memory, has been shown to have or had a faulty memory. She made an allegation against one man, the American lawyer,
withdrew.
Alan Dershowitz, exactly. But whatever the reliability of Giuffre's own testimony, you are absolutely correct that Andrew has been shown to have lied about the extent and the intensity of his relationship with Epstein, and we know that Epstein was a convicted paedophile.
There's a sense, isn't there, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but like bankruptcy takes a very long time to get going. Bankrupt affairs take a long time to come to a point, but when they do, everything implodes all at once.
Well, the Hemingway quote is slowly, but then suddenly.
Slowly, but then suddenly. And one gets the impression that that's what's happening.
Or something like that. You'll know exactly what the quote is, I'm sure. But
there is
something
there
like
is
that,
a Latin tag for it, I don't know. But that's the impression I'm getting here, that we are now moving to a point. You have the 30-day deadline, you have tonight's deadline, which, of course, Andrew will ignore. But over the next 30 days, we're going to be seeing some, well, I assume it's quite sensational stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you know, there's just been, not a household name over here, but a very famous figure, a former cabinet minister, a former Treasury secretary in the US has just had to resign his positions from, I think, Harvard University and some of the big one of the big AI companies that he's an advisor to, because he's caught up in this scandal as well. So there could well be other prominent figures who are going to have to withdraw from public life as a consequence of the revelations we're about to see.
Probably the subject that most people are talking about this morning is how freezing cold it is, and in fact in parts of the northeast it's you know, there's amber warnings and it's quite dangerous. And of course when we get weather like this we shouldn't be surprised at this time of year. We have had it mild for very long, but it does have an impact on the economy, doesn't it? People's stores don't get the visitors they want. Although if you look at the front page of the Daily Mail today, the sort of verdict on the economy is clear. They conducted a poll. What percentage of Britons think the economy is in a great state under Labour? 0. Not a single percentage. I mean, you could ask if you ask people whether they thought the economy was in a great state under any government, most people are usually quite negative. But is it extraordinarily bad as it sounds, Jonathan?
Well, I mean, look, that bit of polling will not be appreciated by Rachel Reeves in 11 Downing Street this morning. But it's, you know, it's not surprising. People have been really hammered, haven't they? I mean, people are skint. I mean, all right, overall inflation has sort of come down a little bit, which is a good thing, but the prices in the shops, particularly in the supermarkets, you know, when people go and do their family shopping every week, are still punishingly high. There's been all of this speculation.
And of course, we're only 6 days before a budget,
Indeed,
which people fear is going to impact, you know, pretty negatively.
Yeah, there's all this speculation swirling that taxes, this tax or that tax is going to go up. We know that tax will go up. Sounds like the income tax increase, which was the pitch was being rolled, that phrase the spin doctors use. They've now U-turned on that, but nonetheless, some people are going to be paying more. So people are feeling they are lacking confidence. I would just say to my colleagues in government, and I've said it before on this show, if you're going to increase tax, right, if you feel you have no option to increase tax, try to link it to what you want to do with the money. Whether that's reforming the National Health Service or whether that's improving schools or policing or whatever, if you just say, "Oh, we've got to do this,"
a black hole
because we've got to, people are going to think, well, "What's that all about?" Link it to some improvements, some tangible improvements.
Problem is, those improvements take a long time to be felt, and until people feel them, they're not going to suffer any more.
But in politics, you've got to make that argument. You've got to make that argument. I mean, you know, a long time ago now, but I worked for Gordon Brown back in the day. He actually increased tax. It was national insurance, and it went into a big expansion of the National Health Service. And actually, that tax increase was popular in the polling because voters could see that it was linked to a particular bit of public services, which in them days was the NHS.
What do you think they would have said when you were in government? What would the poll rating have been about the economy?
Oh, I dread to think. I think you're absolutely right that the country overall is understandably feeling the pinch, as Jonathan said, because of food price inflation. But if you look back to the times when the Conservatives were in government, we had tough economic times then as well. So I don't envy Rachel Reeves. She's made it clear that, as Jonathan indicates, she's going to put the NHS at the heart of the budget. And also she said that she's going to do something to help with the cost of living. I wonder if she's going to have a look at VAT on fuel. Now, it may be a very expensive measure to take, but I suspect what Rachel Reeves will try to say is, look, there is a difference under Labour. And yes, the wealthy, and we'll see how that definition is stretched, but the wealthy will pay more and others will benefit as well. So I think you could see something on VAT on fuel, and I think you could also see, as has been widely trailed, a lift on the two-child benefit cap.
Do you think it could be her last budget?
Well, it may well be. So again, I have an enormous amount of sympathy for the position
Jonathan's shaking his head vigorously.
Because she has become the piñata for the frustrations of almost everyone on the economy, and I think she has a very difficult position. And also, and I know that this is damning with faint praise, there's only one other person I can think of in the Labour Party who would do a better job.
Who?
Shabana Mahmood.
Michael loves Shabana. Absolutely loves Shabana. I came on a podcast I do with a friend, Gloria De Piero, who used to be GMTV's political editor back in the day, and Michael was, waxing lyrical about Shabana. I'm not sure Shabana appreciates Michael's.
I think my endorsement is probably the worst thing that's happened to her. But she is far and away the most impressive person in the Labour government.
But just on this point about,
she's not very popular with the Albanian Prime Minister, is she? At the moment, because Foreign Minister have come out and said that her use of language was ethnic stereotyping, and this was because she described hundreds of thousands of Albanian asylum seekers being housed under British taxpayers' money. First of all, is that true? His argument, the Albanian Prime Minister, is actually the Albanians contribute more to our economy than are required to be funded. And secondly, it's quite an extraordinary phrase, whether it's true or not, that she used. If you consider that Albania is one of the countries we're working well with in terms of asylum seekers and illegal immigration.
Shabana won't be worrying too much if she's unpopular with the Albania.
We should be more worried about being popular with Michael.
Should be more worried about being popular with Michael than being unpopular with the Albanians. She thinks she is putting in place some really tough measures to deal with some of the abuses that have been going on in the illegal migration regime, to deal with, yes, both the people smuggling gangs, but also to put in place measures to return people who don't have the right to remain in the country, to deal with this problem where there's so many people now in not just hotels but wider accommodation. I think 100,000 people in this accommodation that is being funded. So she's not going to lose any sleep over that. And by the way, on Rachel Reeves, look, chancellors are never popular. And I think often the best chancellors are unpopular because to be chancellor, you do have to take tough decisions in the broader interests of the economy.
I have to say, if I were a politician, it would be the one job I would refuse. I mean, it is a thankless task, one has to say, whatever party you're with. Look, we must talk about the COVID-19 inquiry. It's going to publish its findings today into all the decisions that were made by Boris Johnson and your lot. Let's have a look. It's going to look in detail at the political choices, including how lockdowns were introduced, why they were introduced, the closure of businesses, the closure of schools, and all the social restrictions that we all had to live with. Looking back, what would you do differently if you had that time over again?
Well, it's very difficult because at the time, all the decisions were being made with partial information. So we didn't know the origin of the virus. We didn't know precisely what impact it was going to have. We didn't know that a vaccine would come when it did.
True.
But I think that probably, if I look back, the one thing which I feel the most troubled about was the closure of schools.
Did we panic?
I think we can argue that actually we were complacent and then we panicked.
Right.
So I think that there was with some honourable exceptions, we were too slow to act initially. And then I think while the lockdown was right, I think that there was an element of remorse on the part of policymakers thinking because we didn't anticipate what was required early enough, then we can't take risks in the future.
Do you think, at the end of the day, that all of those restrictions, taken as a whole, actually made the slightest difference in the spread of the disease?
I think they did, because the disease spread through social mixing. But there's a big question as to whether or not we actually needed to criminalise some activities, because there were other countries which made it clear that you should not mix socially, but didn't use the criminal law. People followed the advice of government, and as a result, the spread of the virus diminished. At the time, I remember appearing on this programme and our mutual friend Piers Morgan saying to me, come on, does the government say yes or no to this type of activity? And it wasn't just because of Piers, powerful though he is, that we decided the criminal law was the right thing to do. We just thought that was a clear, bright line. But I think there is a very fair argument to say that the British people are sensible enough, if they're given clear advice, to follow it without the sanction of criminal...
It was a shame, though, that Number 10... didn't observe that, and that's part of the problem. If you look at the COVID-19 Bream Families for Justice UK group, who's one of the sort of pressure groups that really wants to hear about this decision that's been released today, and They're saying, you know, more than 230,000 of their loved ones were killed because of failures by those in power. That's the way they see it. They've waited 5 years for accountability. They do not want to find it's a whitewash. They want to hear, it's already exposed, the inquiry, misconduct. But they say, you know, we need to know specifically on the leadership. We want to not just hear about ineptitude, but actually have some kind of clarity on what exactly went wrong. Are they going to get that, do you think?
I hope they will, because Heather Hallett, who is the chair of the COVID inquiry, strikes me as someone who is determined to get at the truth. I've appeared in front of the inquiry. She makes it clear that witnesses have to subject themselves to very close interrogation. The concern that I have from the point of view of the victims' organisation is that there's very little that an inquiry can say that can assuage their grief. So, again, I think we'll all have to form a judgment later today on whether or not the inquiry has got exactly at the truth. But the point I made earlier, I think, is a difficult one sometimes to either get across or to accept, which is that when you're dealing with a crisis, mistakes will be made, but they'll be made often, in fact, always, in good faith. And the key thing is, can we learn from those? I'm talking about the policy mistakes. Yeah. Jonathan might well make a point about the personal conduct of some individuals.
No, I'm not, because that's too much of a sort of open goal. And I was the Shadow Health Secretary at the time, and I think there are 3 fundamental policy mistakes that were made throughout the period. And we came out of the pandemic saying, never again, we need to fix this, and we still haven't fixed them.
What were the 3 mistakes?
The 3 things were schools. I definitely agree with schools, and the best part of 2 years' worth of education was missed by our young people.
So what would you have done? Just kept them as normal?
I think we should have kept schools open longer, as much as we could, not close them, basically, yes. The second thing is we were in a situation where very, very low people in insecure work were forced to go to work because they were not given adequate recompense if ill. So we should have a proper provision of sick pay and support for people.
And that could be counted for a lot of
they were spreading the virus.
Yeah.
The old, it sounds slightly offensive now, but in public health terms, people refer to Typhoid Mary, of how typhoid was spread, back in the day. And the third thing is, we all said we've got to fix social care. We left care homes exposed. Care homes were never given the protective ring that Matt Hancock promised to offer them. He'll be very annoyed with me for saying that, but I'm afraid that is the truth. And we all came out of the pandemic saying we've got to fix social care, and politicians of both parties keep kicking it into the long grass.
And the Labour government is actually having no solutions offered now.
Well, again, we're setting up an inquiry and saying, let's see what the inquiry reports, when we could see in the pandemic that the fact that we've not had an adequate social care system in this country was so brutally exposed, and so many of our elderly relatives lost their lives as a consequence.
I think it's easy to forget how the politics of the personal entered the frame here. I mean, Boris Johnson nearly died of COVID. That must have had an impact into the way the government thought about it. I mean, you wouldn't be human if you weren't affected by something like that.
I remember being on the cabinet call. It was a group telephone call when the news was shared about the fact that Boris had gone into hospital and was, of course, then going into intensive care. And the sense of shock was palpable on that call. And I know from having spoken to Boris at the time and afterwards that he was profoundly affected, and it changed his views on some public health questions, including tackling obesity. I do think, again, that Jonathan's points are fair. It was difficult at the time on schools, but I think the challenge on social care is absolutely clear, and Louise Casey has been appointed by the government to look at this, but a lot of the things that we need to do in order to fix social care, expensive as some of them may be, I think we already know. Yes,
the one thing I was thinking this weekend, because I had COVID, excuse me, there you go, I had COVID last week and over the weekend. Obviously, it's much less virulent than it was a few years ago.
But it's definitely affected you.
I was ill. I couldn't work here Monday or Tuesday. I couldn't come in. But I found myself cursing the Chinese lab technicians who allowed the virus to escape. And then it occurred to me that we've never really got to the bottom of it, have we?
No. And the inquiry's remit doesn't extend to this. I think that's a mistake. At the beginning, there was a degree of scepticism about the lab leak theory. It's now the
Pretty
view
much
of most...
accepted, isn't it?
Exactly. It's the view of most intelligence agencies. And it raises other questions about our relationship with China, which I know you've discussed in recent days. But without knowing what the scientists call the etiology of the virus, its origin, then that means that it is difficult to draw all of the conclusions that we'd like.
Yes. Talking of enemies of this country,
Yeah.
What's Russia playing at in the North Sea with this ship, which has been shooting laser beams at British pilots who are shadowing it? What's Putin's game?
Well, I mean, it is actually hugely serious. And, look, we think this ship is trying to map all these undersea cables. I mean,
And we know it's got the technology to cut them.
Yeah, and the reason why the world is so connected, the reason why we can sort of, send our tweets and we can see what's happening, in all parts of the world is because the way in which the World Wide Web is connected through all these undersea cables, and so much of our way of life now depends on this. And we think Russia is mapping these cables in order, potentially, to sabotage them and put us on the back foot.
Can be phenomenal. I mean, look at the impact on British trade caused by the cyber attack on Jaguar Land Rover.
Absolutely, flattened the growth.
I mean, it's had a major effect on our economy. So these are actually quite soft targets, aren't they?
Yes, I mean, Russia is ultimately a mafia state, and this is a sign of menace on the part of Russia. Obviously, we know that there are attempts by President Trump to try to bring peace. The Russians will want to show around the time of any negotiations that they remain ready to strike back against us, against the West. And it is the case that the Russians have identified Britain because of the bravery, actually, of successive prime ministers in supporting Ukraine. They've identified us as enemy number 2 behind Ukraine.
And how perturbed should we be by yesterday's reports, it was all over the media yesterday, that if there were to be a concerted aerial attack on this country, we wouldn't have a clue?
I mean, we have to take this seriously. I mean, we really do. I mean, we've all grown up, and I know a lot of us grew up in the Cold War, but, I mean, this feels different, really. Yeah. I mean, the threat feels so much more imminent. And just to sort of bring it back to the discussion we had...
Why are we so exposed now? Because we're not a similar age, Jonathan. I remember living with the fear of the nuclear threat. There was a real fear of that, and it was Russia, US, UK. And why is this a different threat for our youngsters?
Previously, we all thought we could completely rely on the United States to protect us. And that dynamic has changed. And that's partly why, to come back to the discussion we had a little bit earlier about Rachel Reeves and the predicament she finds herself in, she's had to increase defence expenditure because President Trump has said to Europe, you guys have got to start spending more on defence. I'm not going to carry on being there as your big brother protector.
He's not going to ride in.
So we're going to have to pay more for our defence. And it's also there's a legitimate debate about this, I get that. But in theory, at least, we're trying to wean ourselves off the fossil fuels, which means we're very dependent on these spikes in energy prices, which, again, jump around depending on how Russia behaves on the world stage.
And isn't there another aspect to this? You talk about mutually assured destruction. That was a sort of guarantee that nuclear war couldn't happen, because if it did, we'd all go down the tubes. This is different.
Completely. There's a new movie, A House Made of Dynamite, about...
Called what, sorry?
A House Made of Dynamite, which is about the threat of nuclear war. I know that the Defence Secretary has watched it. He shared that with a friend at the Cenotaph. And what's terrifying about that film is, A, the Americans come under nuclear attack, but they don't know whether it's the Russians, the Chinese or the North Koreans, and nuclear proliferation. More countries acquiring nuclear technology is a feature of our times. The second thing is, it brings home the fact that actually the decision, if you come under attack, that any president has or any prime minister has, is simply the most terrifying decision that any leader can have. So the House of Commons was right to warn us that we have got to take defence far more seriously because we live in a world that is riskier than ever.
The trouble is we don't have equivalents against Russia in terms of what they are capable of doing in the North Sea, because, as you say, we're an island. So we're fed on all sides by cables carrying absolutely critical cyber information. Russia's sources are secure because they're landlocked, and it's much more difficult for us to threaten them, if you like, the mutually assured destruction.
Yeah, and it's why we've got to cooperate with our European neighbours. I mean, Keir Starmer was in when Europe this week. I think he was in Berlin talking to the German Chancellor, the French President. I mean, that international cooperation or European-wide cooperation now is so vital.